Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about complex trauma, cptsd. So I have had so many of you reach out to me and be like, hey Christy, you talk about complex trauma all the time. You have a course called Love After Complex Trauma. What is complex trauma? Okay, so today we are going to do a deep dive into what is complex trauma, what makes it different from PTSD, and why is it called complex. So if you grew up with childhood trauma and have received a collection of diagnoses from mental health professionals over the years, like major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, borderline personality disorder, PTSD, ADHD, I mean, the list goes on. And gosh, how disorienting. I mean, where do you even start with the whole healing process? Okay, if this is you, take a deep breath. Understanding what I'm about to share with you is going to be a game changer for your healing process. Okay, so let's chat a little bit about cptsd, complex trauma. Complex trauma is defined as the exposure to multiple, interrelated, recurrent forms of traumatic experiences, and this is the big part, the difficulties that arise from trying to adapt to and survive these experiences. These experiences often begin in early childhood, but you can also develop complex trauma as an adult, and they recur over a long period of time. So here's the big piece, okay? The trauma is often inflicted on by others. It is relational in nature, and usually it is inflicted on you by the people who were supposed to be trustworthy all along. So it distorts the lens through which you see all other relationships. So what makes complex trauma different from PTSD? Unlike PTSD that's due to a singular event, complex trauma, cptsd, is due to a traumatic environment. And it's not just being in a traumatic environment, but also surviving the traumatic environment. It is the water that you swim in. So both cptsd and PTSD have similar symptoms, like those re-experiencing symptoms like nightmares and flashbacks, the hypervigilance, and those avoidance symptoms. But people with cptsd have additional symptoms that can often be confused with just who we are. And some of these will include emotional regulation issues. So being really reactive in your relationships, or having struggles with your sense of identity. So having a lot of shame, low self-esteem, and then most of all, having problems in your relationships. The diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, does not capture the developmental effects of complex trauma. Complex trauma, that traumatic environment, and you have to just survive that traumatic environment, stunts your development in some of the key areas that help us navigate life well as humans. And so that leads to just a pile of complications, like attachment issues where you have difficulty with boundaries, trust issues, relationship issues. You can even have physical problems like chronic illness, chronic pain, asthma, skin problems, autoimmune disorders. It can affect your regulation skills. So having difficulty labeling and expressing your emotions, or knowing what you need, and just regulating in general. And then there are those behavior issues like the impulsivity, the self-harm, the sleep issues, eating disorders, substance misuse, reenacting your trauma in your relationship, cognitive issues too. So, a lot of people with complex trauma are also diagnosed with ADHD. And this is because it affects us cognitively, where we have difficulty with paying attention and focusing, getting tasks done, processing information, planning, and anticipating problems. And then lastly, it's also going to affect your identity issues. So you might have really low self-esteem, you might have a lot of shame and guilt and body image issues. I mean, can you just see how experiences of complex trauma literally impact every area of your life? It disrupts us at our core, and it distorts the lens through which we see all other relationships. It distorts the way we see the world. This is why it's different from PTSD. It's not about a single traumatic event, but about the environment itself being traumatic. Every single part of you has now been altered and adapted to the traumatic environment. So complex trauma is about going through life ill-equipped. You are not given the tools to develop in a way that would support you in your relationships. So here comes the shame, right? When you haven't been given the chance to grow in ways that support your ability to show up in a healthy way in life, you begin to feel like you are just inherently defective. And it's easy to think that that's just who you are. I'm just somebody who gets angry really quickly. I'm just somebody who is needy in my relationships. I'm just somebody who, XYZ, whatever it is. And can we please just honor for a second that here you are. Your mind, body, and heart have been adapting and adapting and adapting over and over to the difficulties and the barriers that you were faced with in the best way they knew how. This is why complex trauma is called complex. It is called complex because the trauma exposure and the trauma adaptations are inextricably intertwined. It is a dual problem. It's both the exposure to the harmful experiences and the adaptation to those experiences. And these adaptations have created some of those long and short-term issues in your life. So it's not just about that one event. It's about the collection of events and your ability to adapt to them. So a complex trauma framework is going to acknowledge that your behaviors, like having relationship issues or self-harm or self-hatred or reactivity or eating disorders, they're adaptive. They are adaptive strategies to survive overwhelming experiences. They have helped you survive. So when we look at it through this lens of complex trauma, we go from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. See, the thing is that you have been adapting your whole life. And you will continue to do so throughout your life. You are adapting, you are growing, you are learning. You are resilient. Your whole lens and approach to relationships, your biology, your behaviors, they have been altered to the traumatic environment. And it's easy to assume that that's just who you are, when really it's how you survived. So this is the time to finally unlearn those survival skills and find the you beneath it all. The key now is to adapt once again, but this time to a safe environment, to finally adjust to safety so that you can show up in your life and relationships in a way that is helping you thrive, that helps you feel equipped. So the path forward is going to be unlearning those old patterns and finally filling your toolbox. And if you're listening to this and you're like, gosh, like this is me, like this makes sense, like I finally get like why I have been feeling so disoriented in my healing path and why my relationships are a mess. If you feel like this resonates with you, I want to invite you to take the next step and download my free guide for how to know if childhood trauma is sabotaging your relationship. It is completely free, and it will walk you through how to know the signs that it's your childhood trauma that's creating issues in your relationship versus if it's something you need to work out with your partner. And this is all about knowing the right battle to fight and giving yourself some direction in the healing process. So it'll walk you through that, and then it will give you some tips for how to navigate your triggers when they come up in the relationship. So go ahead and take that next step, download the guide. It's totally free, so there's no reason why not to get it. It's just another tool to add to your toolbox. So thank you so much for being here. It is such an honor to be able to support you, and I am just so excited to see what this path has in store for you.